Welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming. I'm Antoinette Robinson, and I'm from the Crescent Neighborhood Association. Um, just want to give out a few thank yous and then introduce our few speakers today, okay? So thank you to our opening presenter, Marquise Childers Jr., board member of Neighborhood Associations of Michigan and Coalition for Community Development. And to our special guest and discussion facilitator, Ted Jauw, described as political mysteries moderator, hidden histories historian, and influencer. I love that. Gemini the poet had to postpone due to an unexpected situation, and instead she'll return along with Mr. Jauw for the next Words into Action date in this series on October 3rd, same time, same place. On behalf of the Crescent Neighborhood Association, I also want to thank our partners who helped launch this series. Thank you to Coalition for Community Development and Bethlehem Park Neighborhood Association, and to the Community Foundation for Muskegon County for their support. Please note that we are videotaping this discussion today so that we can share it online and give more people access to the helpful information. Our videographer will also do some interviews with some of the attendees after the discussion, so stick around and please give your feedback. I want to thank Chef Idris Jenkins, represented today by his mom, Mimi Jenkins, for providing the food today. So thank you. We have information tables right here to the left where you can get more information. Sign up for our newsletter, and our volunteers also have laptops and can help look up things like voter registration and census information with you. A little bit more about the format of today's discussion. Today's discussion is nonpartisan. Our presenters and facilitators are not here to endorse candidates or policies, but rather to help navigate questions and shared information on how you can get involved so that you may have influence regarding candidates, representatives, policies, and practices that support you and that you support. Is that supposed to be on? No, it's just recording. Can you hear me okay? No, I'm sorry. I'll speak up just a little bit louder. So that's what this is all about, moving words into action. So let's get started. Please help me welcome Marquise Childers Jr.
No, I'm just kidding. Thank you. So I would just want to say I'm thankful to be here and to be in the opportunity to speak on something that's passionate to me, which is neighborhood associations. And I'm here to speak on the importance of the neighborhood associations. The importance. So first thing first, why should we have neighborhood associations? We should have neighborhood associations because it brings us together as a community. That's just one piece. Here's another thing. We get to be able to address our concerns and our problems in the community, but instead of complaining, we can turn those words into actions by actually getting to the root cause of what it is that is the biggest concern to us as a whole. The biggest concern to us as a whole in the city of Muskegon Heights. So with that being said, if you have neighborhood associations that can also come together and work together as individual neighborhood associations and come together as one, you then be able to hit a whole community, which would be the entire city that covers each neighborhood association. So that would be a big benefit to the neighborhood associations. And the piece with that comes after that is that we then inspired empowerment, because now the residents now have a voice. And the whole thing is we don't want to get done too. We would like to work with people but nobody wants people coming in and doing to their neighborhoods and their communities without no one knowing why or even understanding how this even happening in our community, and we have no power or whatsoever. So the whole thing is you bring those neighborhoods associations to be established, then you have a voice in a particular area within the community, and then once you have those voices, you build that collective voice, which is the empowerment. And that right there comes with the nonpartisan piece of now we can put people in position that we feel would do right by the residents that they would serve, any elected official or anyone in that government position, whether mayor or in the school system. So with that being said, that is one of the biggest important pieces, and I would say this too, we get to have grant money. We all like dollars. So you get grant money, and if you got an entire city that's being covered by neighborhood associations, then you have the data of the entire city. And that's your data. Nobody can take that because it's controlled by the people. Who are the people? The neighborhood associations. It's all about the residents. The whole thing is to transform this whole thing, this power dynamic, because it's power to the people, and that is the importance of the neighborhood associations to get that power back. Have a seat at the table, and we can be doing the decision makings going on in our community, in our neighborhoods, and in our own backyards. And we would know what's going on, and we would have control of our neighborhood associations, well, our neighborhood through neighborhood associations. And also, that creates communication amongst each other. Then we go from being siloed from neighborhoods to being a community. And that is big because being local, homebred in Muskegon Heights, we are community-oriented people, and we need each other. So what other way than create these neighborhood associations, then bring us together to create one powerful voice and a collective voice. So, yeah, that's my piece on the importance of the neighborhood associations. I feel like this event is one of those stepping stones with being a part of the neighborhood associations, because we have 3 neighborhood association presidents here who actually does exactly what I'm talking about now. So it's actually putting words into action and bringing it back home to what we're here for, bringing words back into action. So thank you. And I would like to bring Miss Antoinette Robinson back up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Marquise. And that is what it's all about. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and welcome Ted Jauw, and let's give him a little hand clap, round of applause. Thank
That song is over 700 years old. It's from the griot people in West Africa. And it is a song that they say is 30,000 years old. And it's a song of the messenger, Alegbara, Alegba, Elegwa, Eshu. The messenger at the crossroads would sing a song, and the people would gather. And the people would gather knowing by the song whether it was good news or bad news. The song you just heard was a lamentation. It is a song of sadness, and it's a song that is not just about sadness, but what do we do to push past the sadness? What happens when bad things happen? And that song is transcendent. You know, 150 years later, when the Haitians escaped from Haiti because the French and the Spanish were killing them, and they escaped to Cuba, they were not allowed to sing that song. In fact, they were not even allowed to speak their own language. And so they spoke what we call today patois, or pidgin French. And they used a language that had code in it. And so they sang that same song 200 years later, 3,000 miles from where they came from, 10,000 miles from where they came from before that, and 5 generations of different slave owners, from the Yoruba people to the Ghanese people to the Yoruba people in Ile-Ife, going all the way to Haiti, being owned by the French, and then to the Dominican Republic, and then going to Cuba. That song transcends. And that song transcends because instead of coming to the crossroads, we used to have places like this. A cabildo. Across the street from any church, any Catholic church where you had to go or else you would be killed, you were allowed to gather to do anything but your own religion, your own culture, and places like this existed. Places like Congo Square existed. Things that were called cabildos were houses where music could be played. And so we could sing songs as long as they weren't your songs. And so this song was sung in Cuba. Oh wait, but one more thing. This is, because now we're all Catholic, this is a call and response song, okay? So we've all now converted to Catholicism, and it's a call and response song. I point to myself, and whatever I sing, you sing back to me, and then you sing it loud, you know, so that people will think there's 1,000 people out here, right? You got that? All right. When I sing this to kids, they laugh at that last line. And it means the same thing that you think. A few hundred years later, the Haitians become the first independent country in all of the Americas, and the first free nation. And they get attacked. And the first thing they do is they attack back. And where do they attack back? They attack the French. And where do they attack the French? They attack the French in New Orleans, and they kick the French's ass and drive them all the way up to Canada. And that's why the United States bought the Louisiana Purchase, because the French didn't want anything to do with the Haitians. Why? Because the Haitians were starting revolutions all over the world, even in France. The actions of a few people created something that created a whole new idea and world of what was possible for people who came here hundreds of years before, because slavery didn't begin in the 1700s. It began way before Columbus ever came here. In fact, there were 2 Muslim slaves on Columbus's ship who only were there because they were able to read the maps, because the Muslims discovered the Americas before Columbus. And from that moment on, slavery became the norm. And when slavery moved into what we call the United States, one of the first and only places that there were free people was New Orleans. And in New Orleans, the Haitians and the Cubans and the Dominicans and the Brazilians all came, and they were all here as free men, and most of them were mixed, and that was called Creole. There's no such thing as Creole. Creole just means you've got a drop of black blood in you somewhere. And from the north, the Acadians got driven out by the British. Why? Because they intermarried with the Native Americans, and they came down here. And all of these wandering people who were refugees came to New Orleans, and they sang this song. Remember that first song I sang? Elegua, the song before that, Alegbara. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. I'm crossing Jordan. I'm going home. Now we're all Baptists. So now, if you're in New Orleans and you're singing this song, and we're calling this gospel now, and all of these things are happening, the country is changing, everywhere people come together and join together and mix together becomes a culture. So up in the Appalachians, where escaped slaves and escaped Native Americans and escaped Pennsylvania Dutch and escaped Irish and Scottish and Welsh pagans who were sent here in the 1600s by King James, all of those people who were escaping slavery or escaping rape and slavery or escaping rape and murder and slavery, all of those people had their songs and their culture too. In fact, from India came banjos, and from Spain came guitars. And because if you were a slave, you could not play your drums. You might clap your hands, you might jambon, you know, like Michael Jackson. Does anybody remember Michael Jackson? Remember when he was singing, jamon, jamon? That means ham bone. Jamon is ham, and that means play your butt. And so if you were in the Appalachians, you would be saying, ham bone, have you heard? You know that? Okay, so all of those things, that's slave music, all right? Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. That's called patin juba. That's French for clap your hands, because you can't play a drum. And because of all of those musical influences that come together, you get songs like this. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. I'm just a poor wayfaring stranger. So you have bluegrass. And bluegrass all of a sudden becomes happy lamentation. Because if you like do that and play your banjo, it sounds a lot happier. But lamentation is the music of sadness. But at the end of that song, I'm crossing Jordan, I'm going home. That's a happy ending. Even if it means you're going to die and go to heaven, it's a happier ending than the life you have right now. A wayfaring stranger, the wandering traveler, the motherless child, the messenger at the crossroad who is doomed to travel from place to place to place because he is a cripple, or in the griot sense, he's a leper or has smallpox. If I have leprosy or smallpox, I become an outsider and I am doomed to beg for the rest of my life, and my job becomes to be the messenger. All of those things go together. And today I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story that happened because of something that happened yesterday. That's how fresh this story is. And I'm going to talk to you about a neighborhood. I'm going to talk to you about a neighborhood that was not a neighborhood. That in the 1920s, when this piece of land was decided to be a part of the borough system of Brooklyn, it was a place where workers were gathered because of the Great Depression. Anybody remember the Great Depression? You will. Here's the deal. I'm not partisan, I'm just political. So here's the deal. There's this tiny little square of about this size, this neighborhood, and it's in Brooklyn. And in that neighborhood, something happens. In 1930, after the Great Depression, the government decided that what it needed to do in order to help people, in order to spread money out, in order to do what might be called socialism, but we also called it the letter projects of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we had to figure out where money went and who should get it and why. And what did they do? They started collecting the stories of the people in the places where the money needed to go and was needed the worst. And the neighborhoods that understood what was happening were the ones that were served the best. Why? History. This little square in Brooklyn was not a neighborhood. Neighbor means Niachabur, which is a German or Dutch word. You know I'm Dutch, right? That this Dutch word means near born. If you were born near me, you're my neighbors. But if you live in a neighborhood that's not a place where people were born, and in 1920s, this little spare square of real estate that was part of the borough system of New York, nobody was born there. Why? Because if you were a Russian Jew, you went there. If you were a Polish Jew, you went there. If you were a German Jew, you went there. If you were an Israeli Jew, you went there. If you were a Brazilian Jew, you went there. Into this little square was 1,500 Jewish families. And so they were there because somebody had to do the hard work nobody else wanted to do. And they were refugees and had nowhere to go, and it was in the middle of the Depression, and they were in a situation worse than everybody else in the United States. Why? Because they had nowhere to go, and they had nowhere to come, and when they landed in Ellis Island, they were put into this little square. And in 1930, the census came around, and these people decided that they were not going to be called Jews. They insisted that the census see them as Germans, see them as Poles, see them as Hungarians, see them as Slavs, see them as Brazilians. All of these people that came to this little tiny square insisted that they be counted. And the money came because they were counted as people. Now, that might not mean anything to you, but I guarantee you, if you opened your Google right now, don't do that because I'm talking. If you were to open your Google right now and go to the city page of Muskegon Heights, what you will see is the racial breakdown of your city. and the racial breakdown of your city says Dutch 0.1, Polish 0.1, French 0.3, Spanish 0.07, Asian 0.0000000. Me right now, I'm the whole Asian population of Muskegon Heights right now. If you were to look at that, at the top of that list is 66.1% what? No, other. 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 You don't exist. Your city counts you as other. You may be Hispanic, you may be Latino, you may be African American, you may be black, you may be Haitian, you are other. Think about that. You're the majority in this town and you are other. I digress. This little neighborhood in the boroughs of Brooklyn was given the money by the WPA and by the CCC and by all of the different ideas that went around the New Deal, and they created James Madison High School. And they, to this day, are called the Madison Neighborhood. And the Madison Neighborhood went on to do a lot of different things. And so they became a basketball powerhouse. Originally, they were a football powerhouse because Jewish people aren't very tall. But as the neighborhood grew, and as more and more people came into this neighborhood, this high school became so crowded that kids could only go to school 4 hours a day because they had to go to school in shifts. And why? Because all of this neighborhood was based around government companies and industry that was brought there, and these people were moved into this place to do the jobs nobody else would do. What is that called? It's not a neighborhood. The actual word for a group of people that are built around a corporation or an industry is called a ghetto. When we say ghetto, what we're talking about is a German Yiddish word that became much more popular when in reference to Jews than what we think of it today. So, she's my homie, by the way. We're from the Baxter neighborhood in Grand Rapids. And before it was the Baxter neighborhood, it was the furniture workers ghetto. And so if you live in Grand Rapids and you live on the west side, there's the Lithuanian ghetto, there's the Polish ghetto, there's the black ghetto. These were all called ghettos at the time. It didn't matter what color you were. If you were there from another country and you weren't born here and you were here to work because you were here to pay taxes on money that you made that was less than everybody else, you were in the ghetto. Something weird happened in the 1920s is that the Klan came right here into Muskegon Heights. They marched out of Muskegon and they marched here. Why? To threaten you, to get you out of this neighborhood. In 1925, in 1926, and 1927, 15,000 Klanspeople marched through Grand Rapids, marched through the west side of Grand Rapids, and they marched through the Lithuanian ghetto and through the Polish ghetto. They crossed the river and they went to the AME church because they went and then threatened the furniture workers that were black in the black ghetto. Words have meaning. And so this place, this little tiny town, this little neighborhood, over years went from being a ghetto to a neighborhood. And from a ghetto to a neighborhood, people began to be born there. They went to school there. They filled out their forms there. They paid their taxes there. They had a bank. There's no bank in my neighborhood. They had stores. There's no stores in my neighborhood. They had things that made them count. I'm talking today about being counted. I'm not just talking about census. I'm talking about all the ways that you count. In my neighborhood, less than 60% of people fill out their census form. Unless you're white. In my neighborhood, if you're white, 100%. The reason that your city can tell to the nth degree what somebody is, except for people of color, is because they fill out the forms and get what they have coming from the government. And if only 60% of you do that, you are 3/5 of a human being. Do you understand what I'm saying? When this country was started 300 years ago, people of color, black people, were 3/5. X number 100 years later, if we don't participate in government because we only vote 60%, because we only fill out census 60%, because we only pay taxes 60%, because we don't exist, we are making ourselves 3/5 of a human being. And when you look at cultures that decided in the 1930s that they will not have that happen to them, they changed things. Because in the 1930s, the people who came from the diaspora and Cuba and were coming over here, they demanded to be counted. And they created things that made them counted. So in the census, if you are Latino, you're counted. But Latinos are white, and Latinos are black, and Latinos speak Spanish, and Latinos come from Puerto Rico, and Latino. But they governmentally made sure that they were counted. They created a race for themselves to be counted. And when you see a political poll today that says 17% of the population is Latino now, and they have it overtaken the black population, they haven't. Because they're part black, because they're part white, because they're part Spanish, because they're European, because they created a way to make the census make them count and give them political power and give them money and give them clout. Back to my little neighborhood. Madison is a little neighborhood now that is not grown bigger. They have not grown wealthier. They are totally overcrowded, and they are being gentrified. But in little tiny Madison, in Brooklyn, in New York, population less than 10,000 now, 6 Nobel Prize winners come out of James Madison High School. Dozens and dozens of professional ball players of every sort come out of that one little high school. One of the highest graduation rates in the entire city of New York. And politicians. Bernie Sanders comes from James Madison High School. Chuck Schumer comes from James Madison High School. The number of politicians that come out of this one neighborhood in this one high school is staggering. It's all started when they decided to be counted. It matters. And I'll tell you why it matters to me more today. The most famous person of all of the hundreds of, and if you go look up James Madison High School in Brooklyn and you look at alumni, it's staggering to see how many famous and important people who changed the world came out of one neighborhood. Yesterday, their most famous and most important person in this country died. Ruth Bader Ginsburg went to James Madison High School. And she grew up in a neighborhood where she understood how women were treated. She understood how immigrants were treated. She understood how refugees were treated. She understood what it means to be counted. She spent her entire life making sure that 100% of you is counted, that you make 100% of the wage you earn, that you make 100% of what the government sees you as. Whether it is because you are a refugee, an immigrant, a person of color, or, as she is most famous for, a woman. She believed and made it her life work that equal protection under the law starts with you being counted. If you don't fill out your census form, if you do not pay taxes, if you do not show up to everything, all of those things make you count. And the ability for this neighborhood to stay this neighborhood is based upon whether or not you exist or not. And in my neighborhood, where we do not make sure we exist, right now in our city, which has the largest boom of real estate in the entire country, where the values of houses have doubled in the last 5 years, my neighborhood, the ghetto, the place where nobody else wants to go, all of a sudden Newsweek published an article that said 49506 is the most desirable neighborhood and real estate in the entire United States. Because East Grand Rapids, which is right next door to us, is 49506, and one tiny little island that goes out so that they can include lots of more black people in their statistics is 49506. I live in 49506, and I guarantee you that my house does not look like an East Grand Rapids house, and that my neighbors do not look like East Grand Rapids people. But in order for them to be counted, because they needed a bunch of minorities in their district, they gerrymandered over into my neighborhood so they could get money, so I couldn't. What does that mean? That means that my neighborhood association does not get money because we don't fill out the forms. And that the money from my neighborhood association goes to the Baxter Neighborhood Center, which is owned and run by the Eastern Christian Reformed Church, which is the church that the Van Andels and the DeVosses go to, and is now a tool for developers. And so in my neighborhood, 1 block in, everybody gets new lead-free water pipes. Everybody gets new gas pipes. Everybody gets a new sidewalk. Why? Because every single one of the houses 1 block in, 1 safe block in from the main drag that is being developed on all 4 sides of us, they need places to live because there are no real estate left in the whole city of Grand Rapids, and there are for sale signs. And my house, which cost me $45,000 4 years ago, is worth $350,000 today. The ability for you to preserve the nature of your neighborhood is your ability to be counted. When we say Black Lives Matter, it is not just your ability to not get shot in the back by a cop. It means that your life matters, that your lifestyle matters, that where you live matters, that what your culture is, and how you have transformed a ghetto into a neighborhood because you have lived here for generations, and this is your neighborhood. All of those things matter. And I can't even tell you how sad I am about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But I can tell you that the things that created who she is are on us today. Because the things that happened in the Great Depression are happening now. And the great social work and the social programs that are possible, when this is all over, there will be a change. There will be, we will have to put everything back together. Nothing will ever go back to normal. And how will they know where to send the money, where people need the help the most? What is the nature of your culture? If you don't tell your story, nobody will know. And so I'm more interested in hearing your story, and I'm more interested in, because this is not one event. This is about the beginning of things. How do you tell your story? How do you get counted? Because you're not just a statistic. You are not 66.1% other. You are so many cultures, so many stories, so many everything, that's important. And you don't have any power as a number. You have a power because you are a culture, because you are a race, because you are a person who is here for generations. All of those things matter. And so words to actions begins with playing the game and filling out all the forms, but it also means honoring your culture, standing your ground, taking over what is yours. And all of that is how you will matter. And all of that is why it matters. So, I've talked enough. Tell me why you are here. That's kind of an open-ended question, right?
No, I'll tell you why
All right.
I'm here because my grandson, because my neighbor.
Uh-huh.
I gotta have that too, huh? This thing is hot. I'm here because we just started our neighborhood association. We've always had a great neighborhood. When I first moved into the neighborhood, there were only one black that was there, and that was Dolores Brown. She was the first one, and we were the second. But as we moved in, the white people started moving out, and we had great black folks that lived in the neighborhood. Everybody kept up their yards, and everybody did everything. But what happens is, and this has happened to a lot of Heights, your elderly people, because this was a beautiful community, beautiful city. You could go down Wood Street and Hoyt Street and just beautiful homes, well kept. Those folks died. And they left their homes either to their children, and their children pretty much let it go and sold it off or whatever. Now we've got landlords from heaven knows where, maybe out of the country, we don't know, that don't care about our neighborhood. All they care about is getting their rent. So that's what we have now, and that's what we're trying to change in our neighborhoods. Because even with myself and Mark Glover, we started to buy houses in the neighborhood so that we can control who's living there and who's not living there, and control our blocks. But you know, we're just trying to think out the box and be innovative in how we're going to get more homeowners to care about our neighborhood. So that we could build it back up again. So really, that's why I'm here. I wanted to hear your story, which was a great story, by the way. But I wanted to hear your story, and Larry will tell you, Larry Fife and Dorothea, they've been there. Dorothea has been there long before me. She's older than I am. So, but they've got neighborhoods too, and all that stuff except Larry's. Larry, you know, his neighborhood is different. But Dorothea can tell you too about the neighborhood around her house. You know, the elderly folks have passed away, and next thing you know, the houses are torn down, they're abandoned and haven't been taken care of, and then you have a landlord to come. And like I said, they're just there for the rent money. And they don't care who move in. But that's why I'm here today, just to hear the story.
So, what's your story?
Well, my name's Dorothea. I've been a homeowner for 43 years. I've been a homeowner in Muskegon Heights for 43 years. I've been a resident all my life. I love this city, and I have to agree with Mimi, it used to be a beautiful city. I worked in the school system for Muskegon Heights, and I'm listening to your story, and when you said that the Klan came here, I worked at Roosevelt School, and we found pictures where all the kids had cloaks on. They all had Ku Klux Klan wear on, you know, the armor, I call it. So I know what you're saying is true. And I also have to say that my neighborhood has changed in 43 years. When I moved in my neighborhood, there was, in the 4-block radius, there were 3 black families. We're all still there, but the neighborhood is totally different. A lot of tenants, rentals. A lot of people don't keep up their property. The block next to me, it's one house. All the rest are gone. So I'm here because I love Muskegon Heights. And I promised myself, and I left my house to my granddaughter, so I'm here because of her. And I want her to have a neighborhood. Whatever she decides to do with that home when I'm gone, I want her to be able to do something positive. That's why I'm here.
Well, I'm here to be educated, and this was an education from the very beginning, even with the song. And it's important for me to be educated. I'm the president of our neighborhood association, and I need to, bring forward a message to help bring the entire neighborhood together. I think what Estelita mentioned is it's a problem throughout the entire city. It's not a neighborhood problem, it's a city problem. Because for this area of Muskegon Heights, there's not that much of an attraction to keep people that will do well to stay here. So we need to make it attractive enough for people to come back. I mean, I came back after 45 years, but I retired and I came back. So I'm getting engaged with the city once again, but I have family here, so there are a few compelling reasons for me to be here. But to me, is what can I learn from being here is primarily the reason I'm here. And my daughter had me come out here to. She saw the message and she said, "This looks like good stuff," so I thought I would come out.
Hello, I'm his daughter. I'm Tamika Scott Tipton. My husband and I currently live in Austin, Texas, and we've lived in California. We've lived abroad, and we're trying to figure out where next for us. And we both love Michigan. We love Muskegon. I only lived here till I was 7, then we moved to Detroit. But as I've gotten older, my parents have decided to stay in Muskegon. I've gotten to spend more time here. I've been here a lot lately, it feels like. And we're looking for a place to be that feels like home. And our family is here. My family is here. And we want to come back, but we're trying to figure out, is this really a good fit for us to come here? I looked at an old map of the city and how the city was broken up into ghettos, where you had your different areas and black people were put into one area and everyone else was around. My husband is not black, and we've wondered what it would be like to live here, one, as a mixed couple, 2, in an area that seems like the numbers are going down based on what we've seen from the census numbers, and 3, where we see the other areas, the Fruitports, the Muskegons, Fredericksburg's, all doing well, and wondering why that's not translating here. And is there a place for us to be helpful in this, or are we just coming in and not going to have an impact? What is the purpose? So we're really just exploring. And I saw this meeting today and thought this is the type of thing, the community engagement, where it's not focused solely on race, but as the community, like we're all part of this community. And how does that translate? Is there really a place for us here, or is it just going to be segregated? Because we've been in very culturally diverse groups. We don't want to just come here and then just be, again, separated off. So is there a place within the community for diversity and for growth? So I don't know.
I think that all four of you have said something that I consider to be really, really important, and that is that this place has changed. And so it's really, really hard for us to understand how to address the problems of a place if we don't see it changing. And so if the perception of a place is that it is what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we don't know. I mean, the perception of a place like this, or like my neighborhood, the Baxter neighborhood, you know, if you live in Grand Rapids and you say the Baxter neighborhood, people's idea of it comes from the 1968 riots. All right, the riots that hit Detroit really bad, they hit my neighborhood really bad too. And we are suffering the PTSD of that time, but that's like 3 generations now, all right? 1968 is, well, it's not as old as I am, but that's like 50 years ago, half a century ago. The perception of this neighborhood has changed. And if you go back to the 1920s and the 1930s, when this neighborhood first came into being, we are more like the 1930s than we are like the 1960s. And by what I mean by that is that in the wake of the Great Depression and the World War I, and the Spanish influenza that killed millions of people worldwide, the country had to rebuild itself and to use its resources. And whether you call it socialism or letter programs or whatever it is, vast amounts of money were sent to places. But you don't know what this neighborhood is like anymore because you can't just look it up, right?
You look on Google.
Yeah.
My husband typed in, is Muskegon Heights?
Right.
And it said violent.
Yeah.
And it showed all these images of the neighborhoods looking
Yeah.
bad and all the horrible things that happened. And he's like, are you sure you want to move there? Like, you've been here. You know what it's like, kind of.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really. So the perception on the outside is this is a horrible place to live.
Yeah, yeah.
But I know different. So
It's my neighborhood's like that too. If you look on a map and if you Google it, and you look at the police report, my street, Neeland, all right, which goes from Franklin, which was named after Franklin D. Roosevelt, all the way down to Baxter, who was the historian of Grand Rapids. Like, this is a really old neighborhood. That one block, that one street is considered the most violent street in Grand Rapids. It's not the most violent street, it's the most reported street. Why? Because one block in, people have moved that will not put up with gunshots being fired in the air every single night. Now, nobody's dying yet, but I live in a neighborhood where people don't go to clubs at night because they can't afford to and because there are no clubs for them. They are out in the street every night. Are they hurting anybody? Not really. Is it that dangerous? You know, it is in a sense, but it is in a sense that the pressures of cultures coming together and having to live with each other without understanding what the culture is or does creates pressures and tensions in the midst of other pressures and tensions that were unanticipated. Massive unemployment, massive discoveries of things that if you are in my neighborhood and you are working under the table and not paying taxes, and all of a sudden all your neighbors are getting $600 extra a week and you're getting nothing, you might be angry. If your unemployment was cut off because you were not ever really employed because you didn't count, you might be angry. If your baby's mama is getting $600 plus everything else that she gets and you perceive yourself as getting nothing, there's a lot of abuse and tension in my neighborhood right now. We can't begin to address the old change without addressing the new change. And we're at this place right now where we can just start over. And that's really important to understand. There will never be a blessing like the Great Depression was in the 1930s as there is right now. Because our ability to be counted, our ability to belong, our ability to have our voices heard, whether in the street or in the halls of government or at the Supreme Court level, will never ever be like it is in this one moment. Because I guarantee you that 6 months ago, we could never have been heard. And 6 months from now, when this is all gone, nobody will be listening. Your words matter, because your words are your life. Gemini the poet was going to be here today, and she would have come up in front of you and she would have said a poem. And you would have all clapped and you would have all loved her, and she is great. In fact, I would say she's brilliant.
We all know her.
You all know her. But if you don't know her backstory, if you don't know why she does what she does, if you don't know about her daughter, you will not understand the importance and the depth and the power of what she's doing and why she's driven to do it. Stories matter. Yeah. I think that that's really, really important. And it's something that happened in the Depression that made a difference. When I talk about James Madison, that really, really was a big, big thing. And being who you are and everything about who you are, all your backstories and everything, even if you don't think it's important, it's important. That would be the number one thing I would say, besides filling out all the forms and making sure you're counted, is to take those statistics and put a name and a face to that. Your name matters. The name of your place, the name of your school, the name of your mascot, the name of your children. Where'd your grandson go? Oh, there he is. So this morning, my son picks up the flyer and he goes, "Oh, is he the guy who played for Olivet?" You see, people know you. And they know you from all the things that you do in your life. Everything is important. And it's a backstory, because the story of you going away and coming back is an important metaphor. It's an important metaphor. It's an important metaphor. The idea that you're coming back and putting this place not back to what it was, but what its potential always was. And things like white flight, things like gentrification, things like depression, things like diseases, all of those things are the tools of lamentation. In other words, I'm a musicologist. If I were to sing the blues, it would be 12 bars of my baby done left me, 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 my life sucks, my life sucks, my life. But if you listen to a lamentation, it always ends with, I'm going home. It always ends with, I'm crossing Jordan. It always ends with, something hopeful. Even if hopeful is like Ruth Bader, finally getting out of pain and going to heaven. But you all have work to do. Your going home is making a ghetto into a neighborhood, is making a neighborhood into a neighborhood association, is making a town square into a cabildo, is making a church into a parish, is making all of the things of words into action. That the creation of these things redefines the word for you. And you cannot go home until you claim it as yours. Until you clean up your streets, until you rebuild your houses, until you know your neighbors, until you, all of that stuff. But the first step is to be counted. So, does anybody have questions?
I don't have a question, but I do appreciate everything that you've said so far. My name's Jay. I'm a local real estate agent here in Muskegon area, and you're absolutely right when you were talking about your neighborhood and where you bought your house at and where it's at now. Economics plays a part into what's going to happen to our community also, because I can't go to Grand Rapids and buy anything livable for under $100,000. They're coming this way. So us taking care of our community and showing people how to own homes instead of just rent, and taking care of our neighborhoods and keeping it clean will help some of the gentrification that's going to happen here in Muskegon and Muskegon Heights, because economically, those investors are running out of property to buy in Kent County. They're coming to Muskegon County. It's already started. We've already started to see it, but we can still, you're right, we do still have time to control the narrative and what happens here. So I just wanted to thank you for sharing that part, because I think it's really important, like who's going to come and develop or buy, and what they're going to try to do here in our community is really important.
I think that where culture builds, San Francisco was a mixed culture. New Orleans is a mixed culture. Is that wherever creolization happens, great culture happens, great food happens, great advances happen, and the renaissance of the United States was built around places where mixing happened, where diversity happened. And I think that I like the phrase that you just used, controlling the narrative. And I think that the narrative is stories. But it's not the stories of the past. It's the stories of the future as well. And so when you say controlling the narrative, it means creating the future story. Sometimes it means slowing things down. Sometimes it means speeding things up. Sometimes it means evolution. Sometimes it means revolution. But the ability to get a handle of, and the ability to actually control the story, is your ability to not allow it to be controlled from up above you. Because that's a mythology. Nobody's above you. But the people who have the money, and it is an economic thing, there's no doubt about it, that the people who have the money and have to distribute it or redistribute it need to put it where it belongs. And then they can only do that if you as a taxpayer demand that your money come back home to you. Because when you look at neighborhoods who are considered third world or considered ghetto or considered, less than a neighborhood, you will find that 60% of their money comes back, where 120% of money comes back to other neighborhoods. You will find that schools that don't need more money get more money than schools that aren't counted. And when you see less than 60% voting, less than 60%, that 60% number, if you keep it in your head, you will continue to remind yourself that if you do not want to be 3/5 of a human being, that you have to fully participate 100% to get 100% of your rights, 100% of your tax dollars, 100% of everything that you deserve. It's not a handout. Socialism is sharing. The works projects that FDR did that revolutionized and changed this country were not partisan, but they were political. And they helped everybody. And you will be helped by having people come into your neighborhoods. But first, if people will come back, the nature and the culture and the potential and the vision of the neighborhood is what's most important. Because what he said is really important. Controlling the narrative. Because to not control the narrative means that you will be part of the wanderers. You will be pushed out. Home ownership means that there is a census. Home ownership means that you are counted. Home ownership means that you are invested in the banking system. Home ownership means that the real estate system is brought on board. And it also means that the pieces, the bricks that build this country do not stop at the county level or at the city level, that they go into the level of where it actually resides. And that is into the neighborhoods, into the townships, into the smallest units of government that were traditionally built around schools or built around churches. As we sort of mix up and do things and move around, that's no longer there. Places that have no neighborhood associations do better. Places that have block clubs do better. Getting together so that you control the government from the ground up is the most powerful thing that you can do. And it starts with this. And it starts with, I was raised Pentecostal, and we talk about Azusa all the time. And when we say that word, we're talking about a revolution that happened when one guy just got up on his porch one day and started preaching. And then pretty soon, 2 or 3 people, he did it for weeks and nobody listened. And then somebody listened, and then more people listened, and then it became a movement. And then people all over the neighborhood were standing on their porches and preaching because they didn't have churches. They couldn't afford churches. Churches happened in homes. And now the Assemblies of God movement, the church, all of those movements. But that came from an African tradition. The Azusa Revolution came because people used to preach in their homes. And so in my tradition, in my African religious tradition, there is no church, there is Egbe. Egbe means house. And where you worship is the house. But it's also the political unit. It's also the economic unit. And so in Yoruba culture, we say there is the farm, there is the house, there is the road. And those are the 3 pieces of what make up everything within society. And when 2 roads come together, it's a crossroads. And when people gather around the crossroads, That's where the homes are. And those roads lead to the places where food is grown. You see what I mean? It's like the whole idea of community is built on a crossroads. And you see that in African cultures all over the place. And the Catholic Church knew and understood to build parishes and town halls and cabildos. I want to close by talking about town halls. This is not a town hall. This is home. If you can gather your people in your house, in your block parties, in your neighborhood associations, and talk amongst yourself and find out your stories and find out who has the voice and find out who has the vision and find out who has the ability to be heard within your neighborhood, within your houses, your parishes, whatever. Those are the things that are going to matter the most. And part of it is not just to speak truth to power, but you need to speak power to your truths. You need to empower yourself to make sure that you're counted. And that happens countrywide. We can complain all we want about the last election. But the last election was won by 26% of the population. Think about that. 26% of the population controlled the whole election. Why? Because no matter how much you might hate somebody or love somebody or whatever, the fact is that 62 million people voted for this, 65 million people voted for this, and 108 million people did not vote at all. The vast majority, more than 50%, did not vote at all. How much percent? 60%. And these are young people, these are people of color, these are indigenous people, these are people who live on the margins, these are people who don't feel like they belong to a country because they believe that the majority rules and that the majority is not them. But if you're 108 million people, you're the majority. If you could use your words to convince 108 million people to vote, no matter who they voted for, life would change. How do you do that? Well, the first thing you do is make sure your voice is heard. And remember when I said that 49506 snakes into my neighborhood so it can include black people? That's called gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is only possible if you do not get counted in the census, and that only happens every 10 years. The thing that made James Madison High School possible is the 1930 census in Brooklyn. This is a census year. And in this census year, the cutoff date for signing and joining and being a part of the census was cut short. In the middle of a pandemic, the most difficult census year ever, they took months off. Why? So you wouldn't be counted. If you don't fill out your census and you have less time to do it, and there's less money to do it, and there's less organization to do it, and there's less people to go out and do it, and those people are not coming into your neighborhood to do it because they're afraid of you, you will not be counted. And you will not be able to fix that mistake for 10 years. Think about that. That's what he was talking about. Controlling the narrative means being seen. If you're not seen by your own city, if you are 66.1% other, you're not being seen. You're not being heard. and you're not being counted. And that is as much a right and privilege as it is a responsibility. That's the first job. And the second job, and this is the more important job, is not to be just a race, not to just be a number, not just to be a gender, not just to be a sexuality, but to be individuals that have stories that create empathy and relationship and connection between everybody. And if you can do that, you can have the kind of story that James Madison High School had. And you can produce people that change the world. Single individuals that come out of this place that change the entire world. But you can't change the world until you change the narrative, and you can't change the narrative until you count. And so I want to thank all of you for your attention. I'm going to hang out for a while if you want to talk. And also, I really, really encourage you to keep this up. I encourage you to bring 5 people the next time, and to keep doing it, and to keep doing it, and to keep doing it. Not just because I'm here, or because there's entertainment, or because there's food, but because every time you reach out that way, you're getting out the vote. You're getting out the message. You're getting out the story. And that's how those things are created. And the people like Madison, who created a ghetto into a neighborhood, and a neighborhood into a legendary powerhouse, did it by one meeting at a time, one group at a time, and one language at a time. I mean, literally in this 10,000 people ghetto of Jews, there were 20 languages being spoken. They didn't understand each other. It took them 10 years to just understand each other. So part of what you're doing is finding a common language, and you won't find a common language till you start talking to each other. So I hope you do that long after I'm gone, because if you let me do it, I'll do all the talking. I'll just like suck the air out of the room and stuff. So thank you so much for your attention, and thank you for being here. And thank you for spreading the word, all right? Thank you so much. And thanks, Carrie, for asking me to come here.
Well, first thing I would say is I want to say thank you, and that I appreciate Mr. Ted Jauw for coming out. It was very educational and inspirational. He shed a lot of light on things that I was not privy to. Some I was, and some was confirmation. It was almost like a gratitude in the sense of maybe I'm on to something. And so again, I just want to really say thank you. I really appreciate you, and you brought it home on the neighborhoods and bringing words to action. Thank you.
What a wonderful event this really has been, to really engage the citizens, our neighborhood associations. I believe it is imperative that if we want to see a brighter city, if we want to see change, if we want to really see some movement and growth, it starts at this level, where it is citizens coming together, voicing their opinions, not only their concerns, but really coming in a solution-based setting. And I'm just happy to be a part, even serving as an elected official for this great city. I do see the potential, being born and raised here. I do see the many, many opportunities, and it's going to take the neighborhood associations. It's going to take organizations like the Coalition for Community Development, that I'm just humbled to be on that team as well. And I believe this is just the start of many necessary conversations that's not political, that's not swaying to the left side or the right side. It's just really those who love this community, that are invested in this community, coming together to make the community better. So I'm glad to be a part, and look forward to being a part of the next one as well.